Welcome to World Talk Brief. We're starting today with a pretty shocking claim coming from two Russian soldiers. They say they actually witnessed their own commanders executing fellow troops right there on the spot, just for refusing to fight. Now, that line, that isn't from a movie. It's a direct quote from one of those soldiers, describing what they claim is the brutal rule of the front lines in Ukraine. So let's really get into their testimony. So where are these accounts coming from? Well, it's all from a BBC documentary called The Zero Line: Inside Russia's War. The two men who gave this testimony are now on the run, and they shared these stories from a secret location outside of Russia. The first witness we hear from is a 35-year-old man named Ilya, and his background, well, it really makes you stop and think. Before he was drafted, he was actually a teacher for children with special needs. Ilya claims he personally saw a commander execute 4 soldiers. 4. He says they were shot at point-blank range for one simple reason. They had run away from the front line and then refused orders to go back. And Ilya's account isn't just a one-off. A second soldier, a man named Dima, also talked to the BBC, and his story backs up this claim of commanders carrying out these kinds of on-the-spot executions. Dima really tried to describe the horror with those words, but then he added something that's honestly chilling. He said that commanders killing their own men was, and I'm quoting him here, a normal thing. It's this idea that something so brutal could become normalized that's just so striking. In fact, the soldiers even have a name for this alleged practice, which, it begs the question, what in the world is zeroing? Let's break down what they mean by that term. So, according to these soldiers, zeroing is the military slang they use for this exact thing: a commander executing one of his own soldiers for disobeying a direct order, like an order to return to combat. And this so-called zeroing apparently has 2 purposes. First, it's a very direct, very final punishment for the soldier who refused the order. But second, and maybe this is even more important, it acts as a terrifying warning to every other soldier who might even think about doing the same thing. Okay, so that's the story from the soldiers on the ground. But to really understand the full picture, we have to look at the official response from the Russian government. And, as you might guess, it paints a completely different picture. In an official statement, the Russian government described how its military operates in a way that couldn't be more different. It says its armed forces treat their personnel with, quote, maximum care. The government statement also made a point to add that any information regarding alleged violations and crimes is duly investigated, the implication being there's a formal process to handle claims like these. And right here, this is the heart of the issue. On one hand, you have firsthand testimony of on-the-spot executions. On the other, an official government declaration of maximum care. I mean, these 2 narratives just cannot both be true. So when you're faced with 2 stories that are such polar opposites, what are we supposed to take away from that? Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture here and why these conflicting accounts matter so much. First off, there's a really crucial piece of context that comes from the BBC itself. They make it very clear in their report that they were not able to independently verify if the soldiers' stories were accurate. And that's a vital thing to keep in mind as we process this. So the real takeaway from this report isn't necessarily about proving who's right and who's wrong. Instead, its significance is in what it reveals. It brings forward these allegations of brutal conditions and really extreme discipline. It puts a spotlight on the huge gap between official statements and what some soldiers say they're experiencing. And, of course, it raises some pretty serious questions about command and morale within these units. And all of this leaves us with one final and, I think, very important question to consider. When the story a government tells and the story its soldiers tell are this fundamentally different, what does that gap itself reveal about the true nature of the conflict? Subscribe to World Talk Brief for more clear, thoughtful explanations. World Talk Brief, news explained without the noise.